Today, a real digital roadmap. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to this post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. For those following this channel, you will know that I'm a believer in the future disruption of the financial system, thanks to the emerging digital landscape, which is powered by the blockchain and of which Bitcoin is merely the first faltering steps on the journey to a decentralised financial system, which, by the way, may ultimately remove the need for banks and perhaps even central banks. Yet, I also highlight the risks in the system right now. It is the Wild West, to quote the head of the SEC. Now, on that journey, Australia's cryptocurrency industry needs a robust policy and regulatory framework if the country wants to compete with other global financial hubs that are targeting one of the fastest growing areas of finance. Such a framework is needed to protect consumers, promote investment, facilitate enhanced market competition, and to provide a structure where innovation can thrive. Well, that's according to the Senate Select Committee on Australia as a technology and financial centre in its report, 150 pages actually of draft report, called Australia as a Technology and Financial Centre, the ATFC, just been released. Now, as the AFR put it, crypto got too big for the government to ignore. Over the past year, the digital asset sector has grown far too big for governments to ignore it. It's valued at around $2.8 trillion US, according to the Bank of America, and there were around 221 million users worldwide who have traded a cryptocurrency or used a blockchain-based application as at June. That's 4 times higher than a year earlier. And the committee took evidence that 17% of Australians owned a cryptocurrency. The Australian taxation told it over 600,000 taxpayers have invested in digital assets in recent years. But all of this investment is being done in a regulatory black hole. Exchanges holding billions of dollars worth of digital assets are hardly regulated in Australia. Banks have avoided the sector, ASIC offers waivers and limited oversight, and the ASX has declined to list crypto businesses. Austrac has adopted a very light touch, so crypto has been the proverbial square peg trying to fit into a round hole. Now, this committee wants the government to put an end to this regulatory buck passing, and some, of course, continue to wish that the whole space would just go away. It's too big for that now. But in landing recommendations to lift consumer protections, it has tried to satisfy innovators developing on public blockchains, which are truly global networks. Actually, I think the Senate should be congratulated for looking beyond the short-term hype of Bitcoin to the real meat of the digital transformation which will emerge, and where, if Australia is smart, we can play a significant role. So the Senate Committee released the comprehensive plan for Australia to bring crypto into the mainstream. That's only 7 months since its terms of reference were extended to provide a deep dive into the opportunities and risks in digital assets. The report delves much deeper than the popular fascination with Bitcoin and its daily price movements, or even the NFT craze, which is seeing some crypto assets driven to dizzying heights. The committee sees decentralised technologies triggering a wave of new services, including more transparent business models operating on Ethereum, and suggests it would be better for Australia to embrace rather than avoid what is coming down the pipe. Now, this isn't just about the $135 billion US worth of DeFi markets, but foundations for a whole new digital economy, from internet search and gaming to new models for social media and computer storage, where more benefits are distributed to users rather than centralized technology giants. In fact, if Web 3.0 does emerge, the report suggests it will be prudent for Australia to be at the table, building new skills in the country and supporting the creation of those new businesses rather than watching the spoils go elsewhere. Of course, many in this scene will scoff at the idea of regulation and control. Diehards don't want anything to do with running along traditional financial system rails. It has rebellious anti-establishment roots. And furthermore, decentralised, autonomous organisations live on the internet, where local rules are hard to implement in practice. But this inquiry has made it clear that despite the challenges, Australian corporate law is not fit for the digital future. Banks are likely to publicly welcome unregulated players being brought into the regulatory net. Banks like level playing fields, but privately, bankers fret about disintermediation by financial services provided by automated computer protocols. While Bitcoin showed a monetary system can be created outside the banks, applications such as Synthetics, Tracer DAO, Pre-PO, Chainflip, Thorchain, Mstable, DHedge, Ren Protocol, Maple Finance, Immutable, Zora, and Diluvium, which all have Australian connections, show how banking could look quite different in the future. It's a world this committee wants regulators and the Treasury to prepare for. It wants Canberra to set the direction for policy, encouraging entrepreneurs and new players, while ensuring that the minimum level of protections for investors are improved. And the report lays out an ambitious plan for Australia to take a leadership position, regulating the global digital economy, including developing a governance model that would allow companies to be run by an internet community instead of executives and directors. And the bipartisan proposals would see Treasury gain powers to control cryptocurrency exchanges under a new category of financial markets license, creating protections for Bitcoin investors, including local custody rules. And if adopted, the dozen recommendations in the final report would help lure blockchain developers and entrepreneurs to the country by offering regulatory clarity and certainty, as other jurisdictions like Singapore, Britain, and the United States grapple with oversight of decentralised internet businesses. Now, it's worth going into these recommendations in more detail, so we're going to do that now. The first one is to establish a market licensing regime for digital currency exchanges, including capital adequacy, auditing, and responsible person tests under the Treasury portfolio. Now, the report did not include a minimum capital adequacy number, but a holder of an Australian financial services licence offering custody services must have a minimum capital of $10 million. The primary users of custodian services would probably be the half a dozen crypto exchanges operating in Australia, including BTC Markets, Swifix, CoinSpot, Digital Surge, eToro Australia, and Binance. The call for a new licensing regime for cryptocurrency exchanges like Independent Reserve and CoinJar, which are licensed in Singapore and the UK respectively, highlights that the existing Australian market licence regime is overly focused on large operators like the ASX, and the existing light touch approach from Austrac is not sufficient to protect investors. The new regime will include capital adequacy, auditing and responsible persons tests, and be scalable depending on the size of the exchange. We have recommended new licensing regimes which I expect will be much more nimble and light touch than the existing regime, Senator Bragg said. Large crypto exchanges who had been pleading for more regulation to legitimise their businesses will support a regulatory regime, but this may be uncomfortable for smaller, under-resourced operators who have flooded into the space recently in search of quick profits. The second recommendation is to establish a custody or depository regime for digital assets in Treasury. Custodians in Australia are already responsible for the oversight of about $4 trillion in assets. Adding crypto to their bow would sufficiently expand assets under management and provide greater protection for investors. Crypto investors in Australia tend to favour storing their crypto assets via a custodian rather than using their own secure wallet, which, by the way, is the opposite of what's happened in overseas jurisdictions. This reflects the inherent trust of large financial institutions, notwithstanding the findings of the Hayne Royal Commission. Perhaps the trust is a function of the billions of dollars paid in post-Hayne remediation as banks and wealth managers stood behind their broken promises. The third is to conduct a token mapping exercise to characterise various types of digital asset tokens to determine the best ways to characterise the various types of digital asset tokens in Australia. Now, that could be quite a long list, actually, and the more prominent role for Treasury over the innovation portfolio is consistent with recommendations in the recent review into payments regulation by lawyer Scott Farrell and the interim reports of the Senate committee, which warned regulators to back away from hobbling Afterpay's growth and called for more government control over the rollout of the consumer data right. Now, the fourth recommendation is to establish a new decentralised autonomous organisation company structure, a DAO, to be recognised by the Corporations Act. This would allow the governors of projects to contract in the real economy to hire staff and to provide limited liability protections for DAO members. The formal recognition of DAOs and decentralised finance, or DeFi, protocols will provide a strong signal to global developers that Australia is a safe place to build businesses on blockchains such as Ethereum after some teams moved offshore. This technology could see companies run without traditional intermediaries like banks, registries, or even corporate management committees. Instead, tokens can be created and distributed to the online community, allocating various rights, like making decisions for the DAO on products or services. Today is a watershed day for the digital asset sector, said Steve Vallis, the CEO of Blockchain Australia, an industry group. The recommendation that Australia look to recognise DAO structures is a very strong signal to the world that we're ready to lead this conversation. The only other jurisdiction that has created legislation to support decentralised autonomous organisations is the US state of Wyoming. And the report said it and the DAO model law proposed by the Coalition of Automated Legal Applications, the COLA, provided a starting point for Treasury to explore reforms that would support new models of corporate governance with radical transparency. Fifth recommendation is to clarify the anti-money laundering regulations to ensure that they are fit for purpose and don't undermine innovation. In additional comments attached to the report, Labor senators highlighted the ongoing problem of crypto scams and called for AUSTRAC to maintain vigilance over the sector. The increased uptake of digital assets requires regulation to ensure the best interests of everyday Australian investors and consumers are protected first and foremost, and that currently regulatory shortfalls are leaving Australians at risk, Labor said. Labor added that AUSTRAC should work with digital currency exchanges to ensure that Australia's anti-money laundering controls do not create a permissive environment for terrorism financing and cybercrime, and that this should be included in consideration of the implementation of a travel rule requirement. The sixth one was to amend the capital gains tax regime so digital asset transactions only incur CGT when they genuinely result in a clearly definable capital gain or loss. It pushes back on some calls from crypto investors for capital gains tax to be restricted to on and off-ramp points where digital assets are traded for fiat currency. This approach may risk leakage of tax revenue in cases where significant crypto-to-crypto transactions are occurring in ways that accrue a clearly definable capital benefit, the report says. But the committee wants to avoid CGT liability being triggered every time a DeFi crypto asset token interacts with a protocol, which was raised as a concern by developers. So the report calls for legal amendments so digital asset transactions only create a CGT event when they genuinely result in a clearly definable capital loss or gain. The Labor senators call for the government to ensure any new financial arrangements meet global and community expectations on tax fairness. The seventh recommendation is that with the transition to a cleaner economy in the spotlight in Canberra, the report suggested the miners who safeguard blockchain networks be given an incentive to use renewable energy to generate their computer power by a company tax discount of 10%. And with the Liberal Party locked in discussions with the Nationals on the country's Paris targets ahead of COP26 meeting in Glasgow, it's timely, especially as in China, crypto mining has been banned, not least due to high energy usage. The Australian public doesn't want us to burn up the grid with Bitcoin mining, Senator Bragg said. We have a unique opportunity to merge digital asset mining with renewable energy. Some say this is likely to be dead in the water on arrival, by the way. Two Australian Bitcoin miners, Mawson Infrastructure and Iris Energy, are listing on the Nasdaq because it's not feasible to do so in Australia. The eighth recommendation is to have Treasury lead a policy review of the viability of a retail central bank digital currency in Australia, something the Reserve Bank of Australia has been reluctant to entertain, given it could increase the likelihood of a run on commercial bank deposits in a crisis. In fact, the RBA has been focusing on commercially orientated central bank digital currency pilots. but the Senate committee has asked Treasury to study the case for creating a retail central bank digital currency to compete with private currencies being created by tech companies. The ninth recommendation is to ensure the Council of Financial Regulators enact the recommendations from a 2019 ATFC inquiry into the supply of foreign currency conversion services in Australia, that a scheme to address the due diligence requirements of banks be put in place, and that this occur by June 2022. 10th, they should develop a clear process for businesses that have been debanked, anchored around the Australian Financial Complaints Authority. Bragg is clearly concerned about the big banks in Australia discriminating against crypto-related businesses by debanking them. Startups working in crypto who have struggled to attain banking services in Australia will be able to challenge debanking decisions at the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, while banks will be required to conduct due diligence on players rather than adopt blanket bans on the sector. The committee is concerned that the lack of banking options for digital asset companies in particular is not only hampering innovation and investment in Australia, but is potentially creating a single point of failure for the industry, with only a small number of authorised deposit-taking institutions willing to back these businesses, and also is leading to ineffective competition and a concentration of risk, the report says. Debanking may also push businesses and consumers to engage with less regulated or unregulated channels which are not subject to anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism laws. Financial intelligence agency Austrac has been at the forefront of regulating crypto-related businesses. Nevertheless, the report highlights the fear of crypto being used in money laundering as the main reason given for debanking. This leads to risk aversion, where banking services are ceased or not entered into at all, the report says. For example, the committee heard instead that banks have taken policy decisions not to engage with crypto businesses, even if they have been successfully operating for some time. Senator Andrew Bragg said, "We aren't forcing any bank to do anything they don't want to do, but we are going to force banks to go through a process." Number 11 was to ask the RBA to develop common access requirements for the new payments platform in order to reduce the reliance of payment businesses on the major banks for the provision of banking services. Of course, the big banks will absolutely hate that. And 12th, to establish a global markets incentive to replace the offshore banking unit regime by the end of 2022. So this provides a very clear agenda for Australian leadership on digital assets in terms of protecting consumers and boosting investment, said the chairman of the Select Committee, Liberal Senator Andrew Bragg. The market is asking for regulation and we are responding while trying to avoid trampling on innovation. With the global crypto market capitalised at around $2.5 trillion and more than 3 million Australians thought to own cryptocurrency, the plan would see requirements for digital assets to be held by professional custodians who control $4 trillion of assets in Australia. Of course, crypto creates many new risks. A lack of safe harbour protections will make many developers nervous. Getting the bureaucracy up to speed will be a big challenge. This whole space moves so fast that any new law needs to make it sure it is not outdated before coming into force. And no jurisdiction, by the way, in the world has got crypto regulation right. But at the heart of this report is a bigger risk, and that is, of course, doing nothing. As the AFR put it, cryptocurrencies, digital assets and the blockchain that underpins them are causing profound changes in financial services by disrupting the cost and speed of virtually every transaction. They even pose a threat to the relevance of central banks. Now, Australia could sit back and face the world as it was, with regulation designed to license and control large centralised blocks of financial power, dishing out services to customers through third parties, clipping the ticket. Or it could embrace the disruptive forces unleashed by distributed networks that allow real-time execution, contain a single source of truth and facilitate peer-to-peer trading. Cryptocurrencies, digital assets and the blockchain that underpins them are causing profound changes in financial services by disrupting the cost and speed of virtually every transaction. They even pose a threat to the relevance of central banks. So Frydenberg can adopt the key recommendation of Bragg's report and make Australia a fast follower of the global leaders in regulating crypto-related businesses such as the United States, Singapore and the European Union. Or he can allow Australia to slip into irrelevance with crypto investors, mainly from the younger generation, with no protective oversight by the Australian Securities Investments Commission, and crypto-related businesses being forced offshore. Singapore, a country renowned for making strategic long-term decisions for its citizens, realised years ago that it was smarter to get on the crypto train than to leave investors without protection and for it to lose its attractiveness as a financial centre. The fact that local exchange independent reserve is licensed by the monetary authority in Singapore to operate in that country and not licensed in Australia points to the leakage of operations to offshore jurisdictions. The US is the global leader in crypto asset regulation, largely because of the action of several states, including Wyoming, Florida, and to a lesser extent New York. And the Securities and Exchange Commission Chairman Gary Gensler has made clear warnings about the speculative nature of cryptocurrency investments, but he has not stood in the way of the release this week of the first Bitcoin futures ETF. In fact, there are now at least 73 crypto-related ETFs across the globe, according to a quick search of the Bloomberg database. In Australia, a crypto-related ETF will be launched by BetaShares in the next few weeks. The BetaShares product shows it is possible to get around the regulatory vacuum created to crypto funds, but it does not resolve the problems associated with having so many entities operating without regulation. But there are two wider observations also. One strange aspect of the Bragg Committee's report is the demand from crypto-related companies to be regulated. The report says regulation will help unlock the enormous potential in economic opportunities. It's clear that Australia needs a robust policy and regulatory framework for digital assets in order to protect consumers, promote investment in Australia, and to deliver enhanced market competition. The report says now it's unusual for a liberal, free market politician such as Bragg to be advocating regulation as the solution to a problem. But he has shown an uncanny ability to match the government response to the problem. Two Australian Bitcoin miners are listed on the Nasdaq because it was not feasible to do so in Australia. He pushed back against the pressure from the big four banks to regulate buy now, pay later in the same way as credit cards and other forms of revolving credit, and he argued that bringing buy now, pay later under the Credit Act would have tried to put a square peg into a round hole. It's ironic that one of the biggest promoters of the democratization of crypto mining is Square founder Jack Dorsey, who orchestrated the takeover of Afterpay. In the US, the turning point in crypto regulation and crypto's broader acceptance by large financial institutions such as JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley came 2 years ago, when the Office of the Controller of the Currency made it illegal for banks to discriminate against crypto-related businesses. Bringing crypto-related businesses into the regulatory net of the Australian Securities and Investments Commission will put an end to the regulatory uncertainty that is holding back accelerated disruptive innovation. And while there may be also disappointment in the crypto community that the report does not recommend safe harbour protections to close off the potential for regulatory actions down the track, which was a key part of the Blockchain Australia submission to the inquiry, the report overall recognises the maturing of the sector and its place in the Australian government regulatory agenda, and reflects our shared view that consumer protection can be prioritised without denying Australians and Australian businesses an opportunity to participate in the global shift towards the adoption of digital assets, it said. And it provides an indication also about how the Liberal Party is thinking youth policy as the federal election approaches. Senator Bragg said crypto could allow members to connect with young people in their electorates. Treasury is considering whether to include a response to this report in its broader response to the Farrell review of the regulatory architecture of the payment system. My objective is to have this adopted as Liberal Party policy for the upcoming election, Senator Bragg said. This gives us a way to talk to younger people in a way that has not always been easy for my party. Having a clear story to tell about DAO and crypto could make a big difference. And finally, Bragg said he wants the governing coalition to adopt the recommendations as policy in the coming months so that they can be legislated after the federal election that's expected to be held early next year. So in summary, this is a very important step, and it does finally recognise the fact that there is a new digital-enabled future ahead. There are many hurdles and potential bear traps, but nevertheless, I think this report is good work, and it does lay an important foundation. And while you may not like everything in it, the direction of travel, I think, is pretty much spot on. For once, the Senate has done a very good job. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.